Welcome to International 110. My name's Mr. Rankin. I'm going to try to provide you a short introductory video before Chapter 1 to give you a quick background on where the world's population is, where the world's wealth is, where the world's economic growth is, some of the major changes that have happened over the last 50 years, and some of the major demographic trends. And I think this background will help you as we get into Chapter 1, understanding international business and why it's so important and why you may want to study it. So this is the world's map, only it's drawn to population. That's why you see India and China ballooning out. You can see about half the population is in Asia, only about 1 in 20 is in the United States, only about 5% of the world's population. And we really should think of it as not population, but customers. So, it'd be like some not going international, I say, is like somebody in North Carolina saying, I don't want to expand outside the state. 5% of the world's customers are in the United States. You probably don't want to limit yourself just to that if possible. Where's the wealth in the world? Per capita income is kind of the average income, and the average income in the world is around $9,000 per person. But you can see the wealthier ones, if we call upper class, would be the United States, Europe, Japan. The middle class countries would be countries like China, Soviet Union, South America. And the poor countries would be Africa, India, and some of the neighboring countries around India. And when we say poor, just a point of clarification, 70% of the world's has per capita income under $2,000 a year. That's about $10 a day. So even though there may be lots of customers, obviously they're very, very poor, some of them. So that's important to keep in mind. The next thing to keep in mind is where's the growth? Now the growth here is demonstrated, the high growth rate is demonstrated in the green. So you can see China, India, Africa. Some of these poorer countries are growing and growing quite rapidly. Some of the wealthier countries like North America and Europe not growing so much. So it's important to understand these may be poor today, but they're having substantial economic growth. What's happened in the world over the last 50 years? Well, the population has tripled. The amount of stuff has gone up ninefold. And the per capita income has tripled. So each individual is 3 times wealthier than they were before. Now let's talk about the amount of trade, or what some people call economic interdependency. And we're going to measure that by how much is produced by the world and how much is traded. So how much do I produce and keep in country versus how much do I export? Well, in around 1950, because we'd just gone through world wars and a depression and very little immigration, the exports to GDP, in other words, what we built for other countries, was only about 7%. And most of that 7% was in Europe. If you took Europe out of the picture, because they're so close to each other, the countries, this number would be about 3%. So what you had in the world was every country producing for their own needs, and very little of it was traded or exported. Now, today, because we've kind of made a commitment to sharing with each other, and we've put in some international organizations that have helped with trade agreements, and we'll go through these in later chapters, but they've basically made it facilitated trade. That figures up around 25%. So the important thing in this background is the world economic interdependence is 3 or 4 times more than it was 50 years ago. So the last thing I want you to think about as business people is some of the major demographic trends that are going on in the world. First of all, the world's population is aging because of the health care and all this other stuff. By the year 2050, we'll have 3 times as many 60-plus-year-olds, 5 times as many 80-year-olds, over 80s. We talked about the world's getting wealthier. Every person's 3 times more wealthy, so people in poor countries who couldn't afford cars in the past may afford cars in the future. And the fertility rates, particularly in the developing nations, are basically flat. 97% of the world growth in the next 10 years are going to come in developing countries. So, hope that gives you a little context. Look forward to Chapter 1. Any questions, please send me an email and we can talk about it. Have a good week.